Greetings, ladies and gentlemen of YouTube. I'm Cipher, and this is the Devil's Advocate Debate Club. Welcome back. Likely, at least some of you are annoyed or perhaps triggered just by the title of my video. But it's a phrase I'd like to coin while there's still time, because I think it's something that we've seen in the past and are seeing again now, but with maybe a little bit of a better understanding this time around. Rapid onset environmental dysphoria. Now, what does that even mean? Oh, hopefully it kept... Sorry, it looked like the video was going to cut out on me for a second, then it kept going. Anyway. During my time on this planet, there have been a couple of environmental scares and predictions, which, well, some of which came to pass and some of which did not. We've come into a much better understanding of the environment we live. Basically, every decade for the last 100 or so years, we've reached a new level of understanding of the environment that we live in. So, predictions and expectations change. One thing that's been clear for a long time now to anyone paying attention is that we're having an impact on our environment. Scientists have figured out that this could lead to a cycle of heating and cooling that would lead to more and more heating in the long run. So, when people talk about, oh, it's not global warming, it's climate change, it's kind of both. Because it's a cycle of cooling and heating that would theoretically lead to a hotter planet. Oh, it's going to blur for just a second here. Okay, sorry about that. Anyway, this is, as far as we can tell, scientifically factual, evidential, likely to be true, probably the case. And according to at least one UN study, we have 12 years, 10 years now, 8 years, whatever it is. I think it was 12 years at the time, and now it's 8, something along those lines, before we do irreparable damage that would be, in their estimation, outside of human control to fix to the environment, thus starting the cycle of heating and cooling that would ultimately lead us to our warmer climate. Here's the problem with that. When they say outside of human change, or whatever, however they phrased it, they mean with our current technologies. And that's at the time not even taking some of our newest technologies into account. That's not taking into account the innovative spirit of humans, or the fact that we have possible solutions that are theorized and simply haven't been tested or implemented yet. So, the environment is potentially in a lot of trouble. We could be, within a decade, according to some people's estimations, of starting irreparable damage to the planet. There's a wasp bugging me. Sorry if I shake. So, this doesn't mean that the world's going to end anytime soon. It simply means that we have a lot to think about and be worried about for the future. But that's not the kind of thing that sticks with young people. That's not the kind of thing that gets you into the sound bites on the news. And, I mean, there's a certain percentage of people that I certainly think try to, as I do, look at the world logically and reasonably, but there are a certain amount of people who react off of their emotions. Some of them realize it, others don't, but I think there's a growing number of them out there. And so when we hear, oh, well, it's not going to happen within your lifetime, but your generation is the generation that will start the cycle, which 100 years down the road will potentially be the cause of the end of the human race, it doesn't sound exciting. It's realistic, but it's a lot more, more fun, better for your public profile, and, just better for your popularity to say that the world is going to end within this decade if we don't do something, that we will be facing a climate crisis or, an extinction level event. So we've seen time and time again, whenever there's a new level of understanding about the environment and a new level of understanding about the problems that it faces and that we cause, people will become as hyperbolic as possible in order to garner reactions, followers, news time. And it's dangerous and disgusting, but it's certainly not something new. We saw it in the 70s and 80s, and we're seeing it again now. And it leads, as I've mentioned in a prior video, to the new generations of climate deniers. Because that's the other side of the coin, are the people who, when they've heard a ridiculous prediction that just can't be true, or they live long enough to see that some of these hyperbolic predictions are not true, then they're like, the whole thing must be bogus. Because it's very easy to say, look, all these high-profile predictions were failures, high-profile predictions that did not fall in line at any point in time with what climate scientists believe. But hey, they're what a large group of people started believing. And because those are wrong, the whole thing must be bogus, right? Well, no. As with most issues, clearly the solution lies somewhere in the middle. Oh, my little dog's starting to get worried. But ultimately speaking, because of the extremist rhetoric used by both sides in, like many, and in climate change in general, it leads to rapid onset environmental dysphoria. This is something that's comparative to a recent study done on rapid onset gender dysphoria. The idea there being that some people are born with, disgendered features or a disgendered brain and might be, I suppose, physically or medically, or in some case even just psychologically transgender, there's a rise in the percentage of people who are, because it's become not just socially acceptable, but socially beneficial in many ways, in many places, to be trans. And this has led to younger people seeing the benefits and, taking it upon themselves to change their gender. Environmentalism works much the same way. There are social benefits to being an environmentalist. It's become kind of a competition in certain circles. The area where I grew up, to be the most environmentally conscious. Humans have a very competitive nature, and I think a lot of people who've started the whole, everyone gets a trophy generation, which I just barely missed in my kids' sports days, or saw the beginning of, I guess I should say. They are still competitive in nature, so they have to find other outlets than, I won't say the natural ones, but outlets other than sports and the more standard, normal competitions. So they start competing over who can be the most woke, over who can be the most environmental. And when the adults start doing this, I think they realize the kind of back and forth, that sometimes speaking with an extreme rhetoric is just to get people's attention. It's the children who are harmed, because it's the children who don't really understand this. And so much like with rapid onset gender dysphoria, rapid onset environmental dysphoria is something that we see, in my opinion, a lot in kids and teens, as well as young adults entering their college years, I suppose. And this comes from dangerously radical rhetoric on both sides. On the environmentalist side, you have people telling you just about every decade that this is the decade the world's going to end in 10 years if we don't do something now, which was bogus the last 3 times we've heard it, and it's bogus this time, as any real climate scientist will tell you. Or even as the people spouting this will tell you, as Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who recently started the most recent bout of rapid onset environmental dysphoria. And yes, I am blaming this on you, AOC. It's your fault, because while you may say that someone would have to have the social graces of a sea sponge to take what you said literally, 67% of the Democratic Party believed that we'd be facing a global extinction event in a decade after that poll, or in a poll after that statement was made. And that's just the people who believe that we would be facing the extinction level event. It's a higher percentage than that believes that's what AOC believed. So it's kind of funny to hear a Democrat who'd theoretically be running with a Democratic or socialist constituency again tell, well, most of her constituents nationwide, if she were to ever run for a bigger office, that they have the social graces of a sea sponge based on, well, something she set them up for. So I think Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez probably did believe that the world was going to end in 12 to 15 years after reading that UN study. That after making her silly statements, it had to be carefully and calmly explained to her, as have many other things, exactly why she was wrong. And, well, rather than admit that she's wrong, because she just can't do that. I don't know why, but she's just incapable of it. Look at her record if you don't believe me. She, well, had to find another outlet to strike out at, as in anyone who believed her, which were mostly her own constituents. However, this leads to people like Greta Thunberg. And, I mean, the UN study in and of itself isn't the problem. It's the way that the media and some of the politicians involved have framed it. Because, well, the UN study will tell you, like I did at the beginning of this video, that it's highly possible, if nothing changes, we're facing a cycle of global heating and cooling that will lead to heating, which, according to the UN study, was, or would within a decade, if we didn't change things, be irreparable within 10 years, or 12 at the time, whatever it was. Chew bee. Buzz off. And that in itself is not dangerous. Taking that study and using it to back your radical rhetoric, which, I mean, AOC, the one who started this all, now even admits was a lie or a spoof or a farce, not meant to be taken seriously. But while adults might understand the distinction here, when the news media, when the news and the media and just everyone else on Twitter takes her seriously and puts it out there, well, we let our kids on Twitter. I wouldn't, but people do, and they get exposed to these radical extremist lies about the environment. And, kids get exposed to radical extreme lies from both sides on a variety of subjects. But certain subjects only affect certain people. They can only affect you if you're religious, or ultimately only affect you if you care about them. I think the environment is such a hot button issue because it affects all of us. It doesn't matter if you live on the border or work in a job that might be taken by a migrant. It doesn't matter what your, religious or social views on abortion are. we all need the environment to live. So if you can convince people that it's going away, you can probably get them to agree to some pretty radical changes to try and save it. And that's the real purpose behind most of this extreme rhetoric. And the problem here isn't just that it causes children to become, in my opinion, mentally ill. I mean, they get basically a social anxiety disorder that's centered around environmentalism, but it also hurts real environmentalism, because if you're out fighting windmills, you can't look for the real giants. And the environment has some real problems. But if we act like it's going to end in 10 years, well, we would cut all of our carbon emissions, stop driving cars now. Let's imagine Western countries doing everything the environmentalists wanted us to. It would be terrible for the environment, because China and India aren't going to stop. They haven't had their environmentalist movements yet, so they're not going to be interested. What we really need is to start solving these problems. Greta Thunberg is angry that her generation's going to have to pump carbon out of the air from prior generations, but really what's going to happen is the Western societies that just have for generations now developed technology a little bit faster than their competitors, or maybe even the Japanese. The Chinese even already have some of these technologies in place, are going to develop carbon suction tools to suck the carbon out of our air, or will genetically engineer algae to photosynthesize faster. The truth is that progress, moving forward and finding new technologies to help the environment, rather than regression, cutting ourselves off from old technologies in order to help the environment. Both, I suppose, could be potential solutions if we could implement them on a global scale, but only one works if we stick to our own country's business and leave other countries to theirs. So, we either have to look into global foreign intervention in the name and sake of the environment in China and India, or we could, since a lot of these people who are environmentalists call themselves progressives, look for actual progress, namely technological progress, which would also help the environment. But hey, that's just my opinion. Let me know what you think in the comments below. As always, I'm your host, Cipher. Thanks for watching the Devil's Advocate Debate Club. I had meant to do a segment in this video about how Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is talking people into eating babies. I know that it was probably a hoax at the town hall, but I think there's a real case to be made that her extreme rhetoric is going to lead some of her followers to believe that eating babies is a good thing. I have evidence behind this, and I guess I'll get into it in another video. Ciao.